Let's get on to a more serious topic, Rodney, something you wrote about on foreignamerican.com. Headline, California to create a panel to study reparations. The California State Assembly passed legislation to require the state to set up a task force to study the impact of slavery in California, and then recommended the form of compensation that should be awarded or how it should be awarded, and who should be eligible for that compensation by the summer of 2023. Rodney, there's a quote here from California State Senator Steven Bradford saying, if the 40 acres and a mule that was promised to free slaves were delivered to the descendants of those slaves today, we would all be billionaires. I hear far too many people say, well, I didn't own slaves. That was so long ago. Well, you inherit wealth. You can inherit the debt that you owe African Americans. Rodney, what do you think of California passing this in the state to examine this, and also maybe just expand this to the idea of this? There's been calls to do this nationally by Congress. What do you make of this?
I think it doesn't work because if you're going to say that one part of society owes something to another part for a way that the country was set up at a time that it was not just legal, but it was the end of that particular institution being essentially in existence on the planet for all of written history, then you have to say, look, this can't be about just one thing. If you're going to say this was a moral wrong, this wasn't a legal wrong because it was legal, of course, this was a moral wrong, and then you should make up for this. It's like, well, then we have to look at all moral wrongs. We can't look at just one. That makes no sense. And so if you're going to open that can of worms, you got to open it all the way up. And when you do that, you, of course, create every aggrieved group in society, and you're visiting the sins of the father on the son. Mm-hmm. And you're going to set pieces of society against each other, and it's going to end very, very badly. And that's just in the sense of saying, hey, this is a wrong that we want to address. Then you have to get into all the pieces of it. Well, who is going to receive a benefit? Or is it only people who can trace all the way back? Are you saying that this is an aggrieved class for a general thing? And so everyone who is black is going to be within this group, even if they showed up 2 years ago or 20 years ago or 200 years ago or 400 years ago. And so then you got to decide that. And then the other side, what about people who just showed up here and are, immigrants from Europe? What if they're German? And so they showed up 3 years ago. Are they paying something? And so you have some things you have to figure out there. And then you have to ask the other question of, well, what about reparations that have been paid? And we don't talk about it in that way, but that's exactly what reverse discrimination is about, is trying to lift up a group that was historically held down. And so you have to say, well, wait a second, we have now had 50 years of reverse discrimination in many areas. And so what is that worth? Well, now you have to assign a value. And then at the end of the day, say you got all of this done, which I don't think it's going to happen. But if you got all of this done, then what? Does the fact that someone, you say, well, you're going to pay a tax, right? And call the tax $10,000. I know that's not the number, but just call it that. The day after you pay that tax, then what? Because I can guarantee that there are a lot of people who would say, if this is going to be taken from me, then I get something in return, which is a complete washing of the hands of any responsibility to anybody going forward. I am done. Yeah. And we don't want that either. And so I think it's a terrible idea.
So that's sort of the one-time payment idea, and then don't ask again. But that's not setting up anything good. No. What about? But Rodney, the American government has paid reparations to Japanese internment camp victims, some Native American groups. Some would say this is a natural extension of that.
It's not, because paying reparations for slavery, you're not talking about Jim Crow laws. You're not talking about voter disenfranchisement across the South, which did happen, of course, after Reconstruction. You're talking about paying for something that was a legal institution at the time. Was it legal to inter the Japanese, people who had done nothing against the Constitution, people who had done nothing wrong? And so was it legal to take the land from the Native Americans after you had made a treaty saying you're going to, obviously keep this around and respect these borders? No, it wasn't. And so it's very different from those things, because you're trying to address a moral wrong, even though it was still legally allowed at the time.
Mm-hmm. Rodney, there's in response to, because the end of your article, you had just a little editorialize here where you said, Sorry, Bradford didn't make it clear how it applies to millions of American families that arrived long after the Civil War. And this is something you touched on just a second ago. As for inheritance, though, in particular, most people receive little or nothing from their parents, and another fact that Bradford doesn't address. Now, we've got a comment about that, Rodney, that I'd like to read on informedamerican.com. This one comes from David Dunham. Says, yes, not direct inheritance, but white Americans benefited greatly from the years of slavery, creating wealth that allowed the U.S. to become the largest economy in the world. Just because you didn't inherit most of your wealth directly from your parents doesn't mean you don't owe something to the years of slavery. And since then, systematic racism that created the large income disparity that we see between blacks and whites in America today. Some form of reparations is long overdue. It would go a long way to show that we all care, and indeed all lives matter, including Black Lives Matter. Well, in comment from David Dunham, what is your reaction to that, Rodney?
Well, I hear his point, right? It's in the words weren't exactly what he meant. I assume that he meant it's not that you inherited, it's actually that you continue to enjoy a different place in society. And I would say that we have tried as a society for many years to make the opportunity as equal as possible. We don't guarantee equal outcomes. And so you can look across many different people in this society of all different races and say, hey, show up, get the education, do the work, join the society that's working, and you have a possibility of succeeding. And so there are many different reasons why groups don't thrive, and they have not been solved yet. And so I still don't think that reparations is going to make that happen.
No, I do take a little bit of issue with that line of reasoning, this idea, just maybe going back to the quote from Steven Bradford that says, if the 40 acres and a mule that was promised to free slaves were delivered to the descendants of those today, we'd all be billionaires. Now, I don't agree with that logic. It's very, I don't know if consequentialist is the right way, but it's basically drawing a line between the past and the present and assuming all things would be equal. I mean, just for example, what if the 40 acres and a mule promise was given, but say they all went to Oklahoma and then it all got destroyed in the Dust Bowl? I mean, they wouldn't be billionaires, right? So I'm just saying
it's silly, right? Because what you're saying is whatever families were existing at the time would have been good stewards of it, and all of nature would have behaved, and you would have been able to take that and just compound it all the way to today.
Right.
We know, by and large, many families squander their wealth, and all sorts of things happen, right? It's why you see wealth created and wealth destroyed over generations. And so
we see that, don't we? Sorry, but I think there's actually some real evidence of this. I don't have it off the top of my head, but I remember reading this, the amount of families that, in other words, someone like the Morgan family or the Rockefeller family is very, very rare. Families, they come from, they're poor, they get rich, and then within a generation or two, they're poor again, right? Isn't that borne out?
There is the research, and I apologize, I don't have the numbers at hand either, but if wealth is developed, then it takes X generations for that wealth to essentially bleed away. Mm-hmm. And I want to say it's 2 to 3 generations is the typical number where the wealth fades away.
Interesting. Well, it's a very, it is, I mean, we could spend more time on this topic, but we do have to move on. I appreciate you giving your thoughts, Rodney, on this. And certainly everyone that there was many comments on the website as well, but I particularly wanted to isolate that one. So it is it's a complicated one and lots of different perspectives here.